Hey everybody, welcome back to our Meaningful Monday live stream. Hope you guys have had a great weekend and are recharging and recharged for the week. Hope you had a good Monday because it's kind of the end of the day on the East Coast. Those of you tuning in from the West Coast might be having a different part of your day, but welcome anyway. This is a revisit of a topic we did a few weeks ago called intent versus impact, and it's really a balancing act. It's a polarity a lot of folks can tend to struggle with. I mean, we all do as humans, right? So it's an interesting concept. But we're bringing this back up because of a couple of things. One, I got some feedback and people have more questions about it. And two, I actually got a really interesting scenario that a friend of ours shared. And I wanted to read that out for everybody so you can understand where we're coming from. First things first, though, please do feel free to comment, please, and ask questions in the chat. I'm here to answer questions and respond, make this as interactive as possible. So I'll read the scenario for you. And so this person says, I was a department manager in the 80s in a big chain store. Apparently, I made some sarcastic joke to Layla, one of my Afghani employees. I left the store and drove home, which is only a mile away. As I walked through the door, the phone was ringing, and it was Sanjay, another employee, telling me that Layla was crying her eyes out at what I said to her. I rushed back to the store and apologized for whatever joke I made. Seriously, I don't remember what it was, even though it only happened 10 minutes ago. I told Layla whatever I said was just my goofy American humor, and I didn't mean to hurt her. It was met with silence. How could Layla not know how much I respected and loved her, working so close to her every single day? A few weeks later, I she transferred to a different department. Fast forward about 15 years later, and I'm filming an Afghani wedding. Who's there but Layla? She has her back to me, and I say, "Hi, Layla." She turns to see who is calling her name. The silence and death stare made me turn ghost white in horror and shame. I realized that after 15 years later, she still hadn't forgiven me. I often think of that tragedy of impact versus intent. Quite frankly, I'm having a hard time seeing a takeaway here. If I decide to temper my humor around groups of people, how can I continue to be me? This is a fantastic question and a really important distinction to make here. Now, first of all, I want to preface by saying there's no right answer, right? You can't solve this. There's no absolute solution that it's like A plus B equals C every single time, right? It's a situation by situation scenario. It's there's no rules here, and of course Hachi's coming to say hi right now, but that's a different conversation. No, it's one of those things where it's no absolute rules. There really aren't, and so it's a really case by case thing. Sometimes the intent is going to be the value of the intent is much heavier than the impact, and sometimes the opposite's true, right? It's a matter of trying to balance those things out, and it really depends on the two people involved. And that's why it's so subjective. So in this particular situation, obviously whatever was said, right, was so impactful to Layla that the person shared it is basically blacklisted in her book, right? And that's a failure on multiple levels, right? Not necessarily on the part of the person who said it, but on the part of just what our expectations are in general, right? How we are able to communicate and how we're able to connect with other people, right? We don't. It's not always easy to make that to know what's okay to say and what's not okay to say. And it's also not easy to determine what intent was that was said, because some things are just in different cultures and different realities just unforgivable, right? No matter what the intent was behind it, it's just not okay to say certain things or not okay to insinuate certain things. But one thing to notice here is that the person who said what they said, they didn't even realize it wasn't even a blip on their radar for them. They don't remember what they said, right? That's how meaningless it was to that person and how meaningful it was to Layla that she is still 15 years later will not talk to this person, right? That's an important thing to notice, because it just highlights how different we all are in certain ways, how we see the world completely differently, right? Just our own tunnel vision, our own focus, what we choose to focus on will help to define us, right? And just the focus that's so powerful to her that she's not even willing to have a conversation later on. Now, the question was asked in terms of how you can be authentic and still be yourself and hold back. It's not a matter of holding back as much as it is kind of tempering it. And it's not so much holding back of who you are. I'm never going to say be inauthentic, right? Don't be yourself. And if you are someone who makes jokes, you make jokes. But at the same time, if you're in a new company or someone you don't know very well, you're obviously not going to be your full sense. So your full self, right? You're not going to be just let loose and just fuck it. I am who I am, right? That's not how the world works. At the same time, even someone really, really personally, really well, that's where it gets difficult, because you know this person for so long. You in your head assume and hope that they know that you mean well, right? But whatever you mean, that person may not have the same meaning attached to that, and they may have a totally different meaning attached to that thing. So it's always good to know who your audience is in terms of what you're trying to say and who you're trying to what you're trying to convey. Now, in this situation, what could have been different, right? What could this person have done differently? Well, I mean, honestly, I don't know. I mean, if they worked with Layla so much every single day that, and she still had this reaction, then it must have been something pretty bad in her mind, right? But then how could it have been so bad in her mind that it was so insignificant in this guy's mind, right? And that's something that only Layla could answer, or only someone in from that world could answer. It obviously would help if you remember that comment, but it's just, that's again goes to how insignificant those comments can be in our heads. So it's one of those things where it's just like, if you're not sure, just err on the side of not saying it, right? And even if you are sure, it's something where it's like, are you really sure? Right? You got to ask yourself, are you really, really sure? Like, because it's one thing if I joke about one topic with somebody, right? And I know this topic, we're good. No matter what I say, no matter what he says or she says or whatever, we're all good. But then when we switch topics, it's almost like you're meeting that person for the first time in terms of those views or that particular topic area, right? Because you don't really know them in that context, right? If you're talking about someone in the context of, for example, they say stay away from religion and politics on dates, for example, right? Why do they say that? I think that's not exactly the best way to do it. But anyway, different conversation. But why do they say that, right? You say that because you don't want to offend your date on the first date you're there. Well, I would say don't jump into it and say something offensive, but it's okay to state your political views or state your religious views of what you are if you believe in those things. If you have that kind of conviction in what you believe, that's one thing, right? You're disqualifying that person, and they're disqualifying you at the same time as a potential partner. But in terms of friendships, in terms of people that you've known for a while, the reason they say that is because you don't know that person in that context, and they don't know you enough in that context to actually understand, does he or she mean well, or do they not mean well? Are they trying to offend me, or are they not trying to offend me? Do they even give a shit, right? And it may not even be that Layla thought that he was trying to insult her. It may be that she, in her mind, he gave such little of a shit about what her reaction would be that he would say that, right? It could have been just a not caring thing, like, oh, he doesn't care. It's not that he meant bad. He just doesn't care enough to ask, or doesn't care enough to say that thing. I mean, we could go on and on about what it could have been, but the idea again is just to err on the side of caution in these situations. Now, if you're a stand-up comic, this whole cancel culture thing, that's a whole another conversation. that's another thing. I don't think it's one of those things where you assume that stand-up comics are there to make people laugh and they're going to say what they think is going to be funny, regardless whether they actually believe that or not. Is a different conversation, right? But in terms of, I'm talking about human to human conversations, our day to day, every day, talking to people, interacting with folks, and really creating connections. That's where the work is done, right? That's where all these connections come from. Is that if you can share something with someone without worrying about them taking it the wrong way, that's a really strong connection. But until you get that connection with someone where you are confident, that this person knows you well enough that they will never expect that you will either not care about them or think badly of them or be trying to insult them, that's where you want to get to at a certain point with certain folks, if that's possible. And it's not always possible either. I mean, that's why, there's a lot of times where people saying that the N word, for example, is always, a great example of this thing where it's like, it's never okay to say it, even if you're quoting a song, right? Why is that the case? It's the case because it's just a word that's associated with so much pain and so much frustration and suffering that it's not okay, just period. Hey, Tasha, Rick, how's you guys doing? Welcome. Thanks for joining. Tasha and Rick were our guests last week on our Thursday live stream. So thanks again for joining us, guys. But yeah, so it's one of those things where it's extremely important to make sure that you and that other person have that kind of a bond that you know that whatever you're going to say is going to be taken the right way. It's not being inauthentic, right? You're not lying. You're not saying you believe something you don't believe, right? It's better to just be quiet and not say anything rather than say something that you don't believe, right? I'm never going to say to be inauthentic or be someone you're not, right? Always be yourself. But it's a matter of how much of yourself you want to let that person in on, and vice versa, right? The fact that another part you need to look at is that Layla didn't actually say what was upsetting her, what was wrong. It's like almost like he should have known, right? It's like, how can you possibly ask me this question? How can you not know what you said was so bad, right? And so it's perception. Our perceptions are 100% of reality. There's I was watching a show called American Gods. It's really cool. It's a very fascinating premise, but there are a couple of cool lines from that movie, on that show that I want, one of which I want to highlight. It's everyone's entitled to their own truth, but no one's entitled to their own facts, right? Facts are objective, truths are not, because what we see is truth to us, right? What we interpret through our senses is our truth, right? What I see in a situation is going to be how I interpret that situation, how I see it through my eyes. It's not necessarily going to be the actual valid objective fact, right? And especially if I'm in the situation, if I'm involved in it, if I'm a party to a situation, I'm absolutely not going to see it objectively, just by default. The whole thing, there's three sides to every story: your side, my side, and the truth. That is absolutely the case right now, right? In this situation with Layla and this person, because it's something where you can't know what their truth is and they can't know what your truth is unless there's either communication or some other experience beforehand. And so that's why it's such a difficult topic to cover. And I hate that I'm saying it this way, because I feel like I'm not really giving you a satisfactory answer, but it's just something to think about, right? There really is no solution to this. It's like finding a solution to racism. There is no absolute solution to racism. Don't be an asshole. Yeah, sure, that's great. What does that look like? How do we implement that? Right? It's a tough question. How do we eliminate these things? How do we make sure that the communication is always there? But it's got to be a two-party thing. It's got to be both parties involved, right? Where both parties are always assuming positive intent. Both parties are always going to be able to do that, and that's not always going to be the case. There are going to be situations that are charged, that are really, really negatively charged, where it's like a powder keg, right? And any one thing said the wrong way may set that off. So it's a really difficult question. I love the question because it is ripe for discussion. And please feel free to comment in the comment section below, guys. Any questions, any comments, you guys have any thoughts? But I do want to make sure that we're talking about as much as possible. I don't want folks to walk away from this thinking that oh yeah, I'm just trying to avoid and circle around the question. It's not that at all. It's really one of those things where there is no easy question, and it's a situation by situation question, right? And in this particular situation, it's not like this person intended poorly. It's not like Layla intended poorly either. She wasn't like looking for a reason to be upset at this guy, at least not that we know of, right? But it's this situation that happened hurt her really badly, right? Obviously, because 15 years later, she's still not talking to him. So what can you do differently? Just communicate. Try to communicate more. If that's what you did the first time, and then sometimes it's just not avoidable. Some people are just so badly hurt by their past, by things that have happened to them, that you can't possibly deal with that. You can't possibly tiptoe around stuff or really interact with them on that level. And that's okay, because you're not meant to have that deep connection with every single person you meet, right? So there's some people you're just not going to connect with on every single level, and there's some people you're not going to see eye to eye on things with. But in terms of the personal interaction thing, it's got to be a polarity type thing where the intent and the impact are always weighed. And the folks that are going to be, I'll tell you what, the folks that are going to be happiest are going to be the people who can weigh those things and balance them a little more effectively. Layla holding this grudge against this guy, yeah, it's gonna hurt. It's hurting this guy obviously because he cares, right? I know in person he's a good guy. I know he cares about what the impact of this girl was. But until he realized that 15 years later it was still hurting her holding on to this is like her drinking poison, hoping that he dies. It's not really going to work out very well, right? If you hold on to stuff that hurts you against other people, and hold on to negative intentions or negative feelings against people without ever communicating to them that you have these feelings, or that they made you feel a certain way, one, they're never going to learn anything. And two, you're going to hold all this stuff inside for what? It's going to eat you out from the inside, right? And that person, if they don't know what in this situation, he didn't know what he did wrong. He didn't even know, years later, he thought that she'd moved on. To the point where he was even he was happy when he saw her, based on the message, right? He was like excited to see her. He's like, hey, Layla, hi, how are you doing? And she was like, essentially GFY, which sucks, but it's just like, she still hold on to that long ago. And so there's two sides to that. Again, it's not so much, I'm not saying Layla's wrong. I'm not saying this guy was wrong. Sometimes it's just not someone that's wrong in the situation. There's culpability all the way around. So it's one of those things where it's a tough question to answer, and it's not something you can answer absolutely across the board. There's no satisfactory answer that's going to solve the problem as we go. But it's a very fascinating topic, and I'm happy to talk more about it as folks have specific scenarios to talk about, or specific questions to discuss. But it applies in every aspect of our lives. I mean, you talk about employee-employer disputes, right? You talk about husband and wife. Oh my God, that's another whole nother conversation right there. Just family law in general. My, again, legal background, recovering attorney here. But the family law question is huge. I mean, employer employees. You have these things where a lot of times I work with employers and managers and directors and those kind of folks who are upset about their staff not doing what they're supposed to do, When I ask them what their staff's doing, they're saying, oh, well, they didn't do this one thing. Okay, well, did you tell them to do that? No, they should know. How would they know if you didn't tell them? Well, they should know. It's their job. It's in their job description. Who actually reads their job description after they're hired? Does anyone actually read and go back and say, oh, this isn't my job description? Maybe you're building a case against people, but generally, no. I mean, it's something that you're going to do what you're told to do, or you're going to do what you know your responsibilities are. But if you don't know something's explicitly in your responsibilities, even if you should know, right? That's a losing argument. So a lot of times what people will say, I mean, again, I quote my professor from coaching school, is the path to resentment is paved by the request that was never made, right? You never ask someone to do something and get upset with them because you didn't do it. How many husbands and wives get upset with each other for that? Rick, Natasha, tell me who gets upset about taking out the trash when you don't tell the other person to do it, right? It's like, why didn't you take out the trash? Well, you didn't tell me to do it. Well, you should know. Okay, well, yes, at a certain point, it becomes routine that okay, yeah, there's a certain thing I know I got to do, and I didn't do it. But in the very beginning, who knows 100% of what they need to do up front? Not many of us, right? So it's that whole kind of balancing communication thing that we have to work through. So it's one of the things where we want to make sure that we're able to understand where people are coming from and understand that if we can assume positive intentions most of the time, sometimes it's impossible to do that based on the thing that happens, right? There's a legal term called res ipsa loquitur. It means that the thing speaks for itself. Just because something happened means that it's bad or has an impact, a negative impact, right? That thing is just so bad, it's so egregious that it can't possibly have come from good intentions, right? Sometimes those kind of things happen. And then 99.9% of the time, it's not that, right? So what can we do is just assume that there's positive intentions, or at least, I forgot the name of the rule now, but the rule is basically, instead of assuming negative intent, assume that people are incompetent instead of negative intent. So assume just incompetence rather than negative intent, and you have, dumb luck or a poor judge of situation. So either way, that becomes a conversation. And when you get to stuff that's really sensitive topics like race, or like, a lot of the political situations happening right now, which honestly, different conversation again, but it gets tougher to have those conversations because they're so emotionally charged. But when you take the emotions out of it, when you take a breath and actually have a conversation about it, something we realize is the people aren't as evil or as poor, malintentioned as I think they are, as we think they are, right? Everyone thinks that they're the hero in their story and that there's some villain out there, right? No one sets out to be a villain. No one sets out to be, I'm going to start some shit today. I'm going to offend 5 people today. Good. I got all 5. Oh, wait, let me get a 6 for a bonus. No one does that. No one checks off the boxes like that. It's something where we do the best we can in our own little bubbles that we have, right? We try to do the best for ourselves, for our family, for our friends, people we care about. And we don't always think about the impact on other people. And it's time to start thinking about that and thinking about what we can do to not only not have impact, but actually to have positive impact on other people instead, right? And so maybe that's the place to start. But I don't know that there's a solution, honestly. But I appreciate the question. I think it's a great scenario to analyze and talk about. And I think, there's a lot to discuss around this if people have questions. But, it's a really common issue right now, especially with political climate right now. Everything you say one thing that's against one part of the political party, that other side of things, and suddenly you're an extreme other side of things, right? You're a leftist. You're a Trumplican. You're an asshole on one side or the other, right? Just because you said one thing that happens to lean one way, it's an easy slippery slope, and it's unfortunate because nowadays we're creating this polarization that's making things worse and worse and worse. And there's no better place to look to see this kind of craziness than Twitter. I mean, that's like the place to go where like logic dies. It's like it's ridiculous, but it's an interesting study in where we are today to just scroll through Twitter. If you can keep your emotions in check and not get upset and annoyed about some of the stuff you see on there, it's just an interesting, just like scroll through and read some of the comments And there's comments on both sides. I'm not saying either side is right or wrong. Honestly, there's stupid people on both sides, right? People say that there's good people on both sides. There's also stupid people on both sides, stirring the pot, causing things to be a lot worse than they actually are, or to seem a lot worse than they actually are. And a lot of these people are people who are trying to make a living off of this, off of the craziness, right? So they're using they're blowing up the impact and ignoring the intent. And then some people are blowing up the intent and ignoring the impact. So there's both sides of this thing going on right now. And they're doing it to try to profit. And that I think is just disgusting, right? Because they don't care about the impacts of society. They don't care about the impacts to people's feelings or people's families or people's lives. They just care about getting a couple more dollars. And that's just frustrating. That's where our society is going right now. So like maybe ask yourself, what can you do to have a positive impact on someone's life? Forget about not having an impact, right? What can you do to have that positive impact on someone's life, right? What can you do to have a positive impact to have on 5 people's lives, regardless of what comes back to you or not. I really believe that, you put good energy out, it'll come back to you. Maybe not from that person directly, but somehow or another. So maybe that's a solution. Maybe the solution is just to put positive energy out there. It's not always going to be a winner, right? It's not always going to result in being understood clearly every time you make a statement. But at the end of the day, you'll have people who will be able to back you up and say, hey, I know he didn't mean that, or I know she didn't mean that, or she didn't mean it that way, or, encouraging people to have those conversations, right? And to really, or even those people on the side may be able to pull you aside and say, hey, listen, when you said that, this is really messed up for you to say that, and help you understand. Because it's not that person's job to necessarily educate people all the time either, right? And that's another thing to understand, especially when it comes down to race and ethnicity and those kind of things. Those folks are not necessarily the ones responsible for educating everybody, because that's not fair to them. They just got offended. Now they have to explain it. It's kind of those things where it's a delicate balance. But thanks so much for the question though, and for the scenario. I really appreciate the opportunity to share this with you guys, and hopefully it was a meaningful conversation. It's going to be a relatively short one today, guys. But I wanted to get out there and talk about this and address this, because I think it's a really powerful concept to address and to discuss a little bit. And if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the comment box. But if not, then I'll see you guys next week. Well, I'll see you guys on Thursday with Naheed. But we got Chat with Coaches on Thursday. And next week, we got another Meaningful Monday planned again. So if you guys liked the video, please hit the like button. Hit subscribe on the YouTube channel if you're there. If not, check out the YouTube channel. Love to hear your feedback on other videos and things you want to see. I mean, this topic was revisited because a viewer reached out and asked me and a friend, I should say, reached out and asked me to talk about it again and address this issue. And so, like I said, I hope I did you justice. But yeah, thanks guys. Take care, stay safe, and have a great week. I'll see you guys.